What's going on, everyone? This is the Last Minute Audition podcast. I'm here with a very special guest and a very dear friend of mine who I have collaborated with for many years here in Los Angeles, particularly the west side of Los Angeles. He is an actor and a writer. His name is Mark Aaron, and he is he's quite a guy. We've done many plays together. We actually worked on one of your originals, your Abraham Lincoln project. And he is here with us today on the Last Minute Audition podcast. How you doing today, sir?
Doing great. Great to see you, Frank.
Yeah, nice to see you. Good having you here. I haven't seen you in a while. It's been like feels like it's been maybe 6-7 months.
Yeah, since our old days at Winchell's.
Yeah, that's right. And outside of the theater in Santa Monica, the old Miles out there.
Oh, that's a heartbreak.
I know.
That's a heartbreak.
I know. It's yeah, when I was told the news and just with the changes the last 2 years, it's tough to deal with. It's weird. It's weird. It's a little weird just from all the memories there.
Every time I go by there and I see that park, and it's pretty much a homeless park now, and for years we were doing rehearsals there, and there were plays, and there was energy, and there's community, and I miss that so much.
Same. I really enjoyed. I remember doing Macbeth with you, and I just remember the closeness that we developed because all of the just with the characters that we were playing, and then like the relationship they have at the beginning, and then the relationship they have as the play moves on, and how it obviously deteriorates halfway through for you, and it was a good time just doing all that stuff. It's weird because every time I go by it feels that park, or the theater, I should say, feels very abandoned.
Yeah.
It feels ghost-like almost.
Yeah, it was brimming with energy and creative energy whenever we, because some of our casts were rather large, and I loved it. And my hat's off to Tony for throwing that whole company together, the Colonials.
Yeah.
And you did Julius Caesar, didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I did. The first one I ever did with him was I did Midsummer Night's Dream. That was 2000. You know what? That was like September, October of 2013 is when the first time that I did. That's what I did with him. The first full-length production that I did with him.
Wow.
Yeah. See, I did Caesar, Midsummer. We did King Lear together.
Okay.
Gloucester. Yeah. What else did we do together? You and I did. Were you in? I can't remember. Were you in Caesar?
No.
Did you do? No. You did. You played Gloucester and King Lear. Mm-hmm. We did Macbeth. We did
Hamlet.
I didn't do Hamlet.
Oh, you do Hamlet.
I think that was Zach that did Hamlet. Zach and Elisa. But did you do not Midsummer? Did you do? Oh no, you did Midsummer as well.
Yeah,
right?
I did.
Yeah, you were in the what is it called? Like the wall. And the actors that were within the play, the play within the play.
Right.
And then what else? We did As You Like It.
As You Like It, right. Did you do the Shylock play?
No, Merchant of Venice, no.
No, okay.
No.
Wow. You know, Daniel Craig is doing Macbeth on Broadway.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And Tony and I talked a little bit about Denzel doing Macbeth in the film version.
Yeah.
And I said, you know, it's strange because Macbeth was written for a young man, and Denzel is my age. And how's that going to work where an older guy is overly influenced by his wife? You know, usually it makes sense to me, a young man full of piss and vinegar is going to, you know, wanting to please his wife, and she's a go-getter, and she's pushing him for more ambition and everything. But an older guy would say, give it up, babe. I'm not going to do all this shit. Right?
Yeah.
So I'm interested in how he pulled it off. He's a great actor and everything.
Did you see it?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's on, I watched it maybe a month ago. It's on HBO Max.
Okay.
It's on there. I'll watch it. That's all I'll say is watch it, because you're very familiar with the play and you're very familiar with the Shakespeare's work. So I would be very interested in next time you come on, you watch it and then we'll talk about it. Because it's I agree with you. The things, what you are seeing and what your take on it is just from seeing the trailer and seeing the casting, you're correct in your assessment of it. That there is something that's missing because Denzel is not, he's okay in it. It feels like they miss the mark on some of the interactions and the depth of what everything really means in it. I talked about this with a buddy of mine. The main speeches that he has missed the mark. And it feels like because they don't understand the spiritual depth of whatever is the consequences of taking these actions and what the consequences are of their decisions. There's no spiritual element to it. It's very much just an earthly, like, oh, we might get in trouble and we'll be doomed here on earth. Like someone comes after us.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, interesting. I look forward to seeing it.
I think it's interesting. It's definitely worth seeing it. The black and white aspect to it, the whole, I guess, like the artistic direction of it is really interesting. But I'm really curious to hear what you think about the acting with the whole piece.
I look forward to it. Yeah.
And what was the name of the play again that we did, the Lincoln play? What was it?
The one that Scott and I wrote, House Divided.
House Divided. That's right. Can you tell me a little bit about? Because I remember when we were doing it, and you were very, very much Lincoln was a big inspiration to you, and you had played or portrayed him in other projects before. So give me a little bit of insight. How did that find you? How did the story of Lincoln find you in that way?
Well, I was cast as Abraham Lincoln in a pilot several years ago, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago. And I was cast primarily because I look like Lincoln. Then I auditioned. I mean, I was brought in because I look like Lincoln, tall and gangly. And then he saw that I could bring some truth to the words. And it blew my mind when I got cast, because it was like, holy smokes. To me, Lincoln's the best president ever. He was the best writing president. He had the best writing style and very succinct in his style, but a lot of depth to his writing. And he was governing America in the most tumultuous time in our history, except for now. So this was a week-long project that we shot, and I dived into it, Frank. I loved it. It was all straight Lincoln speeches and things that he had said, warts and all. You know, Lincoln was not an abolitionist. He was vehemently opposed to slavery, but he did not believe in black-white equality. So the writer wanted to bring that out to give it a more provocative aspect. Unfortunately, that came out right around the time of Barack Obama's inauguration. And when we finished shooting, it was a wonderful shoot and everything. And when we finished shooting, they put together a trailer that was, the studios didn't like it. Mm. And it showed aspects of Lincoln's character that they didn't want to portray to the public. And so the producer, who was a neophyte, he gave up pretty quickly. He gave it a couple of different cuts. And we had a wonderful Lincoln scholar on the set, Michael Burlingame. He's written several books. He's a a professor emeritus at a university back east. And he helped me a great deal in my understanding of Lincoln and how I was going to portray him. So yeah, it was a heartbreak when it didn't get picked up and it didn't receive a whole lot of exposure. But the preparation gave me the impetus to write my own Lincoln play. And I started with, because I'd read like 3 or 4 books about Lincoln, and I loved it. The thing that the shoot was called Abraham Lincoln on Slavery, and it was based on an interview with a newspaper publisher right before his second inauguration, which was right before the Civil War. And it was framed at that time because there was a whole lot going on. States were about to secede, and the publisher was I think he was pro-Lincoln, but he asked some insightful questions, and it was all based on, there's this videotape footage of Lincoln being interviewed by this publisher, and it was found in somebody's attic or something, and they were going to distress it, and that was the whole concept for this series. And then they were going to do de Gaulle, and they were going to do Mao, and they were going to do all these great historical figures. Anyway, long story short, didn't go. And I wrote House Divided with my creative consultant and friend Scott Bernstein. And that we couldn't get legs on that either. We worked it and worked it, and we did a stage reading. And
At the old Sam French.
Yeah, the old Sam French.
The old Sam French.
Which is another heartbreak, Frank, because I've spent many hours there going over plays and decide I want to do this monologue, I want to work on this,
Meeting people.
Yeah. Ever since I've been in Los Angeles, which I've been here since 1981. And that was a hub. I just love that place. So to get back to House Divided, our leading lady was a girl I did plays with at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, Rebecca O'Brien. And she said, Mark, this is a film. Turn this into a screenplay. And I did, with Scott's help. And it was so much fun because we took it out of the Oval Office, out of the White House, and we encompassed the whole grounds of the White House. And there's flashback scenes, and it was wonderful, Frank. It was a wonderful experience. And we had some bites initially, and right now it's a little bit kind of dormant. But the whole idea of taking it out of the White House, the confines of the White House, and blowing it up to cinematic, oh, God, it was a great experience. It was, and in fact, one little scene, I have to tell you about this. My character is out, Abraham Lincoln is surveying the grounds of the White House right after this happened 3 days after Appomattox. This is one day in the life also. And this is 3 days after Appomattox and like 3 or 4 days before he was assassinated. So once again, the most tumultuous time in our history. And people are out cheering and everything on the White House grounds, and there's craziness and drunks, and the Civil War is just over. And I go out with my secretary, Nicolay, and survey the grounds. And this character comes up to me with a wide brim hat. And we made it all kind of dreamlike. And it's my father. But my father's passed. And Lincoln had an estranged relationship with his father. So this guy comes up with this hat on, and he says, son, you're going to have to fight the good fight or something. I forgot what the exact lines were. And he lifts up his hat, and I said, Father, and we have this little scene. And it was beautiful, Frank. It was just a beautiful little scene. And I thought, this was my dream. One of my favorite directors is Clint Eastwood. And a lot of people throughout my career have said, Mark, you look like Clint Eastwood. You could play his son.
Yeah.
And I said, if I can get Clint Eastwood involved in this to do a cameo in his own film and direct it,
Yeah.
oh my God, it'd be like a dream come true. So it's an unrealized dream, but that's
You still got time. Clint's still with us.
He
You
is.
still got time.
He is.
You still got time. And I think that's a project that just sounds to me like just based on the work that Clint has done, he's very willing to take on projects that are A, historical,
Yes.
and B, that would even be somewhat controversial. He's very willing to do those two things. So you still got time to do it. Time is still on your side. That's really beautiful. I love hearing I can feel your passion for this story and how it's affected you, and just you feel so full of life for it. I love that. I can feel your not just the depth of Lincoln himself, but like that period in history. And like you said, it was so tumultuous, and you have this guy standing at the apex of this catechism of human history and human nature, and that he was able to somehow weather that storm in the best way that he could with the knowledge and information that he had. And I love hearing your take on it and your passion with it. I want to watch this movie now just from hearing you talk about it.
We kept all of the walks of life who come in from the stage play, which you did the stage reading of. We have all the different people coming in to get favors from Lincoln, and because Lincoln opened up the White House to anybody who wanted to come in.
That's right. Can you please go into? I remember you saying that. Can you go into more detail about that? Because I think that's so interesting. I remember you saying this when we first did it.
They called Lincoln wanted to call them his public opinion baths, and he allowed anyone to come in, just stand in line, and they would come in fully armed and everything. And they would try to get their job, their brother a job on the railroad. They would come in to try to get this done or get that done, or women would come in. Their son has been charged with desertion, and they would plead his case. So all these different walks of life. So when we wrote it, we tried to include all of Americana in about 6 or 7 characters. And they would wait on the stairs going up to the anteroom, and they would just come in and meet with the president. They would talk to him. And Lincoln had, everybody knew him for his humor. Even in the Civil War, he lost 30 pounds in office. Wow. Through the Civil War. So he was emaciated, and he was ground down by the war and the loss of life and the mothers who lost their sons. And he lost 3 children in office.
He lost 3 children while he was in office?
Yes, he did.
Wow.
Is it 2 or 3? He lost little Willie, and he lost... Anyway, they were lost to typhoid and something else. But it was a heartbreak for him, and it became a point of estrangement between him and Mary Todd. Mm-hmm. So Mary Todd makes appearances. She comes barging into his office, having some demands on her husband, the president, and there's comedic elements in it. And then a mysterious figure comes in with his slouch hat on, and that's that it could be John Wilkes Booth. And we wrote it in an ambiguous way because Lincoln saw John Wilkes Booth perform, and he was enamored with the young man. He thought he was fantastic, and
This is historically that actually like
yeah.
happened.
Yes,
He
it
saw
did.
him perform before.
He saw him perform more than once. And on one occasion, he sent a note to the stage manager back to John Wilkes Booth. He says, "Come visit me." And supposedly John Wilkes Booth tore it up right in front of the stage manager. Wilkes Booth hated Lincoln, hated what he stood for and who he was. But Lincoln saw him on one occasion point him out in the crowd. And I'm not sure what play he was doing, but it was like he was like Tyrant. You know, he was pointing him out, and Lincoln was in the presidential suite, you know, up there. And so we took all of these elements that were completely historical, and you know, we embellished them.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the driving force in the story, is that there's this mysterious figure that could be John Wilkes Booth, and he could be coming to visit Lincoln, and he could be coming to kill him. The original idea that John Wilkes Booth had was to kidnap Abraham Lincoln. It wasn't to kill him in the Ford Theater. So, you know, we took that, and John Wilkes Booth was like the Brad Pitt of his time, or the Tom Cruise. He was a star. He was, women loved him. Audiences loved him. He was a dynamic performer who did acrobatic stuff.
Wow.
Crazy, always hurting himself, you know, cutting himself and doing this and that because he took it to the edge.
Very dedicated to his craft, pushed himself.
And he was from the biggest acting family of the time, the Booth family.
His brother was Edwin, is that correct?
Correct. And his
yeah.
father was the patriarch of the family and a wonderful Shakespearean actor.
They all were very all of them practiced Shakespeare. I mean, that was their thing, wasn't it? That was what they were known for.
It sure was.
And you may know this. Did they all have a specific Shakespearean role that was known as their, like, that's what the crowds came to see them as when they were performing that? Do you know what his was?
I don't, but I do know that there was a lot of typecasting going on back then, and there was an apprenticeship in the theater world back then that you started out, you know, with, you know, carrying a sword on to give it to somebody, and then giving a line or two and this and that. And I guess if you're from a big acting family, you work your way up that apprenticeship pretty quickly. And I'm not sure what I do know that it was, John Wilkes Booth saw himself as fighting against evil and fighting against tyrants. In fact, when he shot Lincoln, supposedly he said, "Sic semper tyrannis," or something, or whatever, you know, something about the tyrant being dead, or no longer the tyrant, or whatever. But it was in Latin. And so I think of a lot of his favorite roles were the little man fighting the tyrannical powers. So yeah, that's a little overview of our story, and it was a wonderful episode of my life, and I would love to play him before I get too old.
You still look right now, just looking at you now, I would cast you as Lincoln in a heartbeat. You got the beard. We just hide the hair a little bit under a hat. We got it. You look like you're ready to go right now. You
know, a funny thing, Frank, the more work I did in studying Lincoln for the screenplay, we found out what a tough guy he was. He was very strong, and he was a fighter when he was younger, but like a gentleman fighter. not a boxer, kind of a wrestler. And people would challenge him. You know, he'd go from one town to another when he was studying law, and they would challenge him to a wrestling match, and he would take everybody down. So one of the scenes that we have out on the lawn, he breaks up a fight. He just he clotheslines this guy and takes him to the ground and puts him in a half Nelson or something. And I thought, no one's ever seen that before. Lincoln, you know, a 50-something-year-old man taking down, but it's historically possible because he was very strong and he had no fear when it came to that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Based on your own personal experience studying the man and playing the man and writing about the man, did you see Daniel Day-Lewis's portrayal of Lincoln? How would you say that? Because it's also a very specific moment of Lincoln's life that they portray. It's not like it doesn't give you a wide picture of. It's a very myopic moment in time. What would you say that they got right, or what else would you say that they missed about him in that time period?
I think Daniel Day-Lewis did a wonderful job, and I think Spielberg took liberties with the time and the story to make it more appealing to today's audiences. From what I know about, you know, the getting that amendment through the House and everything, and that was the whole crux of the story. Daniel Day-Lewis, it's interesting the choices he made. No one ever heard Lincoln's voice, so no one knew what he sounded like. But you heard people say he had a surprisingly higher voice than you would expect for a tall man. But he had a very strong voice because people could hear him. He would give speeches, you know, when he was debating Stephen Douglas. He would give speeches and people could hear him, you know, for long distances.
Yeah.
So the strength of his voice and I would guess the certitude comes through in Daniel Day-Lewis's portrayal. And he has a little bit of he gets the highness in the voice and there's a little Southern tint to his accent. I think he did a wonderful job. Very different from anything else he's played, and very watchable. He's a very watchable actor. A lot of people consider him the greatest actor of our generation. Mm-hmm. So, you know, when we grow up and we see Lincoln portrayed by Gregory Peck, you know, you know, and all these other guys, and Daniel Day-Lewis came along and did a completely different version, and he certainly is not as tall as Lincoln, but I loved it, and I loved the whole story. It was very watchable.
What would you? Because you were saying that Lincoln was not an abolitionist. He did not believe in black-white equality, but he hated slavery. So, because, you know, the story and what we're told from a modern sense is that Lincoln was all about freeing the slaves. Is that entirely accurate? And if not, what was his main driving motivation for not allowing the South to secede from the Union?
Lincoln felt he thought a man should enjoy the fruits of his labor, and he thought it was evil. Slavery was an evil, and when the South seceded, his whole focus was to keep the Union together and do whatever it took to keep the Union together, whether it meant suspending habeas corpus, to jailing publishers of papers who disagreed with him. Whatever it took, he considered, they were like insurgents. They were secessionists, so they didn't fall under the confines of the Constitution. And so a lot of people challenge some of the decisions he made. But, you look at the context of the times and you go, well, the whole idea was to keep the Union together. And the problem he had with abolitionists, he didn't think slavery was brought up at all in the Constitution. And it's really not. It's brought up in the Declaration of Independence. But the Constitution doesn't deal with slavery. Lincoln did not think that slavery should extend into the Western territories. And America was moving west at the time. Mm-hmm. And that was the big issue of the time. Border wars were going on. I don't know if you remember John Brown, the fervent abolitionist. Lincoln didn't agree with him. And John Brown and his sons died trying to free the slaves. Their whole idea, they were trying to get Frederick Douglass on board, and Frederick Douglass thought he was crazy. But history has painted John Brown as a nutcase, and he wasn't in that. He was a man who believed that slavery was evil, and he was willing to die for it. And his whole idea was that we're going to go into this armory, Harper's Ferry, and we're going to get all these arms and give them to the slaves in the surrounding
plantations.
Yeah. And we're gonna have a rebellion, and it's going to happen. And Frederick Douglass didn't support him in this, and the slave states, I don't know how he was to get the message out to the slaves to join him, but he had very little help, and it ended up being just a massacre there at Harper's Ferry. Yeah. And Lincoln did not support him in that. Lincoln was in a lot of ways, he was a by-the-book lawyer. And so his problem with slavery basically had to do with it being, not be able to enjoy the fruits of your labor. That's basically it. And that he thought that slavery would, over course of time, die out. And the abolitionists wanted it done immediately. The John Browns, the Garrison, the great publisher of the newspaper who was the abolitionist, he wanted slavery over immediately. Two different schools of thought.
It sounds like both wanting the same thing.
Yes.
But just different tactics and different ways of going about getting it.
Right.
And it sounds like that it caused different major philosophical differences and major differences in how courses of action would take place. Yeah,
Frederick Douglass didn't agree with Lincoln on everything, but after Lincoln's passing, he said Lincoln was unequivocally the black man's president. So,
do you think I was listening to something with the Civil War about Robert E. Lee and how Lee felt that Lee and Lincoln had a great respect for each other, but that Lee felt the calling to his home state of Virginia and to that his family and his family's their, I guess, allegiance and loyalty to their home state was more important than the federal government. Do you think that at that point in time because right now the federal government is huge. It's like what we've known our entire lives. But then it was such a new idea to have this very highly centralized federal government that was making all of these states do what they wanted to do. Do you think that was one of the reasons why Lee decided to go against that?
I do. I think the states' rights cause was a huge issue in the Civil War. And I think Robert E. Lee, most of the great tacticians and military strategists and everything, their allegiance was to their state. And the federal government, yeah, like you said, it was an entity that was kind of a new thing to think that. But if you look at the Constitution, states are given autonomy to a large extent. They're given a lot of autonomy that a lot of people don't know about even today. That a lot of people think in terms of the government, the federal government. They don't think in terms of the state government, the state legislature, and who holds the cards. You know, if there becomes a conflict, and in this the 2020 election, to bring this up to current times, we have during the COVID pandemic. We had states changing their election laws due to COVID. Well, the election laws that the federal government has set down give the states responsibility for their individual elections, but it has to go through the state legislature, which means it has to, the representatives of the government. It can't be through a judge at that state. And that's the way a lot of these voting laws were changed.
Was through the stroke of a pen from a judge, is what you're saying.
Thank you. And that's the problem with a lot of people's problem with the 2020 election, is that, the Constitution was not followed. And they would say, well, this was a pandemic and everything. Yeah, okay, it's strange. It all benefits one side, though, so.
Or even if it's one side versus the other, but it sounds like what you're saying is that regardless of a pandemic, it still is, this was the law. And so we're going to suspend law for the sake of public health, which was, I guess, maybe not really fully explained or written within that law. So there's a lot of gray room for backhanded discussions, maybe backhanded deals to take place, which I think is why a large population of the American people felt like they were left in the dark.
Exactly.
And that maybe it's like, because you can follow the logic. Well, okay, but you're still leaving a lot of us in the dark, and that's not what we're supposed to be. It's just not what this is about. And it raises a lot of questions about the law. It raises a lot of questions about who executes the procedures of the law. And it can question certain integrity, I guess, about the actual structure of how the country is supposed to operate on a large scale.
Yeah. When you have a large segment of the population who are very skeptical of the behind-the-scenes machinations of what's going on, that's not good. It creates discord. It creates division. Mm-hmm. And these are the times we're living in now. And I don't like it, and I've watched it. But to go back to Lincoln's time, a lot of people would say, well, he didn't follow the Constitution. He suspended habeas corpus. But I think his whole idea is that it didn't apply to them because they had already seceded from the Union.
Right. So his logic was, well, you are willfully giving up your rights as states in this union. So the Constitution, which you want to, that you want all the benefits for, but not all of the not all of the disparaging things, that it doesn't apply to you.
Exactly.
Because you willfully gave up your rights.
Right.
So, yeah, I see. I never thought of it that way, actually. I never really, but that was Lincoln's logic, right? That's what you're saying? That was his logic behind it?
I believe it was. And it was also, in a large way, I think, Machiavellian. The end justifies the means. These people are thwarting my efforts to win the war. Get them out of here. Shut them up. There was huge division in the country. And I don't think there was one vote cast for Lincoln in any of the 6 or 7 slave states for his second inauguration. For his second administration.
Wow. So,
and the cartoonists, they painted him this way and that way. And I think we're in parallel times now. I do think we are.
Yeah, we live in it feels to me the times that we live in now that I think people never really anticipated, and even the more, call it federalized or concentrated authorities within our country didn't anticipate, is the widespread use of technological communication, where individuals like ourselves right now having this conversation and this is a very simple, calm, rational conversation, just passing and exchanging ideas, which is not even an American concept. This goes beyond even an American idea. This is like the foundation of like Judeo-Christian ideas, like the foundation of a lot of Western civilization, that you pass ideas freely without fear or reprisal from a governing or government authority, some institution coming down on you for saying something that they don't agree with. And I think that today, the powers that be are very nervous, and we feel a crackdown more on these ideas because there's so much that's exchanged freely that they can't plug the hole in that ship to maybe stop it. And everything's becoming decentralized again. You have cryptocurrency that's doing it, completely decentralized form of currency. You have, even with the last 2 years, people in certain counties of certain states want to secede from other states.
Right.
They want counties to secede and to join parts of neighboring states. You have completely different sets of COVID laws and mandates in other states versus the others. I would argue, and I know a lot of people out here in California, specifically LA, would disagree with this, the complete difference in philosophy, these polar ideas of philosophy, these polar ideas of methods, is exactly what the founding fathers intended when this country was designed and built. It was supposed to be this way. They were even more polarized when Washington was president. The parties were even more polarized than they are today. They would literally fight each other, physically fight each other on the floor.
I know.
That's how intense it would get.
Yes.
Can you imagine at the time that, for example, Jefferson, you had Aaron Burr, his vice president, and Alexander Hamilton actually shoot each other in a duel. And I hear people argue, oh, that was the time, the culture. I say, yes and no. You're still talking about someone potentially losing their life. Can you imagine 2 politicians doing that today in Washington, D.C.? Can you imagine 2 of them just believing in their ideas to such an extreme, having such a bitter rivalry with one of their fellow members from across the aisle, that they decide, you know what, we're going to settle this the old-fashioned way. Go get a pistol. We're going to do it right on the steps. We're going to have people there to make sure that everything's fair and square. It was that important to them that I think that when I hear people out here and you hear this talk a lot, well, I wish we'd all just get along. I don't want to get along with everyone because it's not interesting. It doesn't mean that we have to fight.
Right.
It doesn't mean we have to actually go to war with each other. It just means that we have this battle of ideas and let the greatest idea win. Let the greatest idea be the one that's presented on the table, as opposed to whichever one makes everyone feel the best. Because it's a very common denominator, almost subhuman way of thinking. It's like, well, what causes the best equilibrium? That's not necessarily the best way to govern a group of people. If everyone is just allowed to do what they want to do, then there is no actual freedom because there's no equality in that. It's actually not true equality. Equality is the ability to, freedom and equality is the ability to restrain yourself from doing whatever you want to do.
Well, I think that's what the founders intended when they wrote our Constitution, when this country was formed. It was operating under the idea of self-governance, that when people govern themselves to a large extent, the Leviathan would have less power, and it would be less important for the authorities to have to weigh in.
Mm-hmm.
But self-governance, I don't think a whole lot of people understand that concept anymore. We have large segments of our society that seem to do whatever they want based on, I don't know, just groupthink, and they feel ideology. They feel persecuted. They feel historical injustice. They feel like the man owes them. They lots of reasons. But I live, right next to Venice in Santa Monica, and the crime is through the roof now. The crime rate. I had my 75-pound bag of tools, a big case of tools stolen, and it was cabled into my Jeep. And it's like, who wants old tools? It hurt me on an emotional level more than anything because some of them were my father's tools. Mm-hmm. But they were stolen. And then they came back a week later and took my surfer hat and some, bungee cord or whatever. It was like, and bikes are stolen and this is stolen. And that's just, they have we have cameras set up everywhere, and you see these people come in with their hoods on, and the manager will take this to the police, and they go, oh, yeah, that's a guy with his hood on, stealing your shit.
They just describe what's happening in front of you.
It's like
confirming that it's happening. It's
exactly.
Yes, it's there. That's happening.
And I understand it's all over. I understand the crime rate is all over. And once again, parallel times. The idea of self-governance is these people aren't governing themselves. They're.
What do you think the answer is for that? With this, if there's a complete lack of belief in self-governance, or if there's the unawareness that the concept exists at all, what do you think is the answer for it? Like, at least in LA with the crime.
Well, a lot of people would say the loss of God in people's lives, belief in some God, following the tenets of any of the major religions, because they all have pretty much the same concepts, the golden rule and all that. And the loss of that
moral foundation.
The same moral foundations. And so since that is gone to a large extent, I don't know, the cat's out of the bag, and you go into the bread belt and all of Middle America, and it's still pretty strong. People are raising their children in, according to whatever moral dictates that they, whatever religion, Presbyterian, Episcopalian, Baptist, or whatever, but they are following it. In the cities, it's kind of off the hook, and you look at, I think once again, the crime rate mirrors that. It is several cities where I would hate to be walking down the street late at night in some of these cities and have to deal with some of this stuff. Anyway,
New York has that really bad right now.
Oh, I've heard.
I see it. It's almost like it's no matter where you look, social media, the news, anywhere, there's always a story coming out of New York about someone getting jumped.
Yeah.
Usually young women getting beat up pretty bad.
Yep.
On the subway or in the streets.
Elderly people too?
Yeah, elderly people. And it's sad because even in LA I've noticed, and the west side of town from being here, it feels much more neighborly. There's like a more neighborhood sense to it. But I still notice that you walk down the street, going for a walk in the neighborhood, and you say hi to people, and I think a lot of people are shocked to just hear someone say hello, and I don't blame them for it. I think that we almost condition ourselves to like just beeline, stay focused on yourself. Don't look at anyone else. Just kind of stay in your own lane,
bubble.
Yeah, stay in your own bubble as to not offend or maybe invite something in that's you really don't want, and it's a shame.
It's gotten worse in COVID too. And I don't feel like a real part of the community anymore. I used to love Santa Monica and everything, but too many times I'm walking down the sidewalk. There's a 10-knot wind blowing off of the ocean, and somebody's walking toward me, and they see me without a mask on, and they go to the other sidewalk.
Yeah,
and I go, where does that thinking come from? That trillions of cubic feet of air are flowing off the ocean, you're going to get something from me. Yeah. It's a weird concept. And so that's happened so many times, or people have called me out in public for not having a mask on outdoors.
They call you out in public?
Oh, well,
like
yeah.
Walking the streets?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, I went surfing just a few weeks ago, and a couple, how dare you? Something like that.
You were surfing?
I was on my way to surf. Yeah,
okay.
I had my wetsuit on, everything, carrying my surfboard. I was waiting right at the corner of Ocean Park and Pacific there. And I forgot what I said, but it shocked me, Frank, to hear that. Different worldviews, different fear levels, I guess. I maybe we don't watch the same news.
I don't even know though. Like, look, I understand that this stuff affects people physically. From a health point of view, it affects everyone differently. But my mindset has been like, if you want to go get the jab and you're all up to date and you want to wear a mask, that's your prerogative. To engage with somebody that's your neighbor or someone that you just randomly run into on the street, like you said about when you're about to go surfing, it's completely unnecessary. And it's actually not, it's more than unnecessary. I feel that you're looking for a fight. And I don't know if that's good for all of us. I don't know if that's good for us to be all policing each other's health like that. It's a very nasty place to be in. And it almost is it's become this strange dog whistle for morality. Of that, this is how people show that they're the good person, that they're one of the good people that is in the neighborhood or in the community. Like, oh, look, I'm good. I'm wearing my mask outside. I'm policing my neighbors. And America has this strange movement of little tyrants running around.
You got
It's the land of little tyrants that everyone kind of feels like they know They know what's best. I even hear people talking about this stuff with Russia and Ukraine, and I firmly believe like these other parts of the world, like they don't value the same things that you value, or our way of living is not the best way for them to live. It's very clear. We were in Afghanistan for 20 years. We're gone. We didn't really change much. Iraq, same thing, really didn't change much. That maybe we have to reevaluate our position on other cultures of the world, thinking like, okay, they don't want our version of democracy and freedom. And that's okay. It's okay to say that. It's okay that this works for us. We have grown into whatever this is with the massive corporatism of McDonald's and Starbucks and iPhones. Don't get me wrong, all those things are great. They all spawned out of this birth of capitalism, free market society. It's beautiful stuff. But to just go over there with the force of a gun to these other places and say, well, you need to like do this as well. It's very myopic. And it's always disguised as with that, like we want them to have freedom and democracy, but really there's some other underlying thing with oil or some other
corporate,
some other interest that we are not fully aware of. But I see this with the Ukrainian president with Zelensky, and I see a lot of people posting online like, and it's a very dumbed down common denominator comments about him, like, oh my God, what a man, and blah blah blah. It's like, I think the thing that all those things are true, but I think the thing that's more important is that this really means something to him, his position, and he's willing to die for it. And I did a solo segment on this podcast when this first happened. And the thing that I was putting out there for everyone to question, I say, regardless of having a geopolitical opinion about all this, I feel it's necessary for everyone here, every American here, to look at their own leaders and say, would they do that for us? And I'm pretty sure everyone can answer that question, like in an honest way. I'm pretty sure there's not many people that are going to look at Congress, that are going to look on their television sets, that who's there every single night and say, would that guy do that for me? Would he do that in DC? If DC was under attack, would they be standing there with their group of men grabbing a rifle about to defend the Capitol? I think everyone has a pretty clear answer on what that is. And I think that is, we sit atop our perch, especially our government sits atop its perch. And I'm blessed to be an American. I consider that. I've had family members fight and die in wars here for the last 100 years since my family came here from Eastern Europe, from Russia and Ukraine. That's where they came from, in that region of the world. And we've forgotten who we are. We really have forgotten what we are. Where America is a consciousness. It's not a race. It's not a religion. It's not a gender. It's a consciousness. It's a heart center. And we forgot what that is. It's like we become so invested in policing each other instead, policing thoughts.
We've also gotten soft. And the one example of that, I think, are poor people. We've always had poor people. We'll always have poor people. But the poorest that I knew, I grew up in Nashville, they worked. They all worked. Whether they were, even the blind were at the train station shining shoes or doing this or doing that. And there was a nobility to the work. Mm-hmm. And I grew up respecting poor people so much because they work so hard. And so I don't think that's the case uniformly anymore, because of government largesse and the welfare and the whole cradle to grave security that we have now, and I understand the reasons for that. But it's a lot of the people have become soft, and I think not only soft physically, but soft in their thinking as far as what's best for me is also best for my society. Actually working, having dirt under your nails, and toil, which goes back to the Bible. If you don't toil, you don't eat. To get back to the whole idea of the neocon movement and going into Iraq and trying to change people's governments and everything. And I look back on that, and from what I remember and what I saw, it was a noble idea that we would have allies in that country, in Iraq. It was myopic, like you said, and it was short-sighted and stupid that we would take out their strongman, Saddam, when he held a tight grip on all those different religious groups and everything, and all those bodies.
Kept Iran in check as well.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
But when we toppled that regime, I remember they had voting. You remember the whole ink on the palm?
Yeah.
Every poll that I saw come out, everyone said that's the best thing they've ever seen. They were so happy with that. They were so happy with having their vote count. And I thought, well, it's of course, because it's a human thing. It's like it's not something we invented. I think all of humanity knows on a deep level that we get our rights from God. But we put it into practice, and we put it in our Constitution and our Declaration, and so we instituted over there, and they loved it. They loved it. Also, they loved Saddam being toppled, and we saw this in the streets, and I saw it in the polls, but. The other side of the coin was they wanted America out. They didn't like us being the occupying force there. So it's like, okay, we just go in and do the deed, then leave, and then then all of the disbanded parts of his government would come together again and that's what they did. They became ISIS, and it became almost worse in a lot of ways. And it was a very volatile time, very volatile region that Saddam had kept a handle on. He kept the lid on the thing. But I think the lesson from that for me, human beings want their freedom. They want to have some kind of say in who they elect and the governance of their lives. But no one wants an occupying force, and it was a sign of hubris on our part that we could do that.
I think there was also like a little bit of a historical, call it like learning from the mistakes of the past, because after World War I, when Germany was beaten during World War I, there was an opening, there was a gap, that kind of the vacuum that opened up, and they had to rebuild themselves, and there was this force that emerged out of that was able to rally their people again under one massive cause, and with Hitler, and then causing World War II. And I think that a lot of that, us going to Afghanistan, occupying it, us going to Iraq, taking one regime out, because it's like, well, if you take one out, great, there's a little bit of peace and people are happy and there's exuberance, but then there's a vacuum. And what do you do? And I think that the United States, we're pretty peaceful. Like when you just look at the our people, the people here, most people just want to be able to provide for their families. They want to be able to, and it's like this honestly in any other part of the world. They want to be able to provide for their families and take care of their loved ones, put food on the table, and have some kind of meaningful connections and grow and have meaningful experiences in their lives. I think in America, the biggest difference compared to, say, someplace like the Middle East is it's like you said, there isn't this big emphasis on something bigger than ourselves anymore. There's this lack of a higher power in our day-to-day life, something that we ascribe to and strive towards. And instead, there was a vacuum, and the government sucked in, got into that place. Government morality is now dictated by the government. It's dictated by culture. It's not dictated by some more spiritual higher power, whatever that may be. And in the Middle East, they have Islam. Islam is a very, very old religion. It's gets its roots from Judaism, from Christianity, and it knows that about itself. It is very confident in that. And there are rituals and there are beliefs that guide their societies. And ours shifted. Like when we started getting stuff and iPhones and the ability to buy 3-4 cars for a family and giving little kids phones and a television in every room and going on vacations 2-3 times a year, and the fact that you can even go down to the store and get ground beef that's clean. It's clean beef. You can take it and cook it and eat it, and you will thrive on its sustenance. You don't die from some disease or get sick. It's something that I don't know. When you put it into perspective about other places in the world, it's hard to fathom not having these conveniences and it's a luxury.
Yeah.
That we have. And I think with everything that's going on now in Ukraine, I don't think the average American could ever imagine something like that happening here.
Yeah. Well, with our distribution problems in the last year, and at the beginning of COVID, some of the shelves being bare, people got a taste of what it could be like if we were to have a infrastructure problem or a shutting down of, the what they call it, the grid. Power grid. Oh my gosh. That would shake up some people.
Yeah.
And I would hate to be here in Los Angeles if something like that went down. Water, especially.
Yeah.
The search for water, since we don't get our own water here.
Yeah.
It's piped down from up north.
Think about that for a moment. That if the grid went off here in LA, I mean, we had the riots in June of 2020, and I know even around here there were boarded up businesses. At one point, there were National Guardsmen on the corners with their M16s. And just imagine, like, there's no police. Imagine that. Like, there's no police. And there are political organizations and movements that are pushing for that stuff. And you have to ask yourself that question, if you push for that. Even if you say that you just want reform and you want it to be clean, this isn't the way to do it. Because if you look at, there's always going to be, if you topple it, there will be a vacuum of power. And even if your group manages to take that power, it's going to be shaky, it's going to be destabilized, and it's going to cause massive amounts of violence, death, and it will cause problems for everyone. It'll be 1,000 times worse than what was there before. It's an example in history. It happens everywhere. It's human nature. It's human nature, the struggle for power, the want for power, and then the desire to take it. And once it's taken, until it's fully stabilized and that other force that wants it is beaten back down, there's always a struggle. There's always violence.
and economics suffers in chaos.
Yeah.
No one wants to start a business, after the '92 riots in South Central Los Angeles. Everybody took their businesses out because they thought that it was an unstable area.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if the whole city is like that, I don't understand that type of thinking where, there are no consequences for misbehavior.
I think, like you said, I think that at the heart of a lot of people, the intention is for something good. I think the intention is good, but the way that the actions are put into place are not well thought out. And so there's an imbalance with right intention, right thought, and right action. There's a massive imbalance there. There might be right intention, there's not right thought, and then not right action. And so what do you get? You have issues. You have destabilized regions. There were destabilized regions of the city. And people can say all day, like, well, the police were there and it's fine, the National Guard. And you go, okay, how many LAPD members are there? How many cops are there in LA? Say there's 100,000 police officers in Los Angeles. 100,000. I think in LA County there's 14 million people. There's 14 million people for 100,000 police officers. I don't even know if that's the right number.
Yeah.
Say that even there's 500,000 police officers, which I don't think that there is. That's not a good ratio.
Mm-hmm.
For one cop, for how many people is that? That if the city went up in flames and there's things going on left and right, we got a taste of it in 2020, and it's sad to see. It's also deadly to see, and it stokes more than what's just on the surface. It's not just an idea of inequality, because there's another side that gets stoked. It's the people that want their city back. It's the people that want their communities back. It's the people that want to live a normal life. It stokes other forms of anger and rage that is not taken into account.
There seems to be a huge movement in the last 4 or 5 years, maybe half a decade, on empowering the disempowered, or empowering the fringe elements of our society, the radical elements of our society, no matter how small they are. And I understand, like what you were saying, intention and everything, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Right.
And there has to, and also you on the countervailing feeling is the tyranny of the majority. There has to be a balance between the two. But people with unstable lives, should not be dictating for the majority, and especially when it comes down to things like crime, which affects everybody. It's I see it up close and personal here when I go back home to Nashville, and it's the crime rate's up back there too, but you don't see it as much. It's not as I think it's less a problem back there because of the family structure of most people. Once again, the city versus the smaller city or the suburban areas.
Is Nashville? That's where you're born and raised?
Yes.
Is it a much more? Because I don't even know what the population of, what's the population of Nashville right now?
I'm not sure. I do know it's grown dramatically in the last 5 years. Skyscrapers up cranes up everywhere. It's from what I understand, people leaving Los Angeles are moving to Austin and Nashville, and the largest percentages. So,
what was the population when you were a kid growing up there?
probably a million five. I'm guessing in Greater Nashville, and it was all white people and black people, and that was it. I mean, of course, we had a strong Jewish. I grew up in the Jewish community. We weren't Jewish, but my father was physical education director for the Nashville Jewish Community Centers. And so I grew up going to Jewish nursery school and kindergarten and day camp and everything. And I came to admire the Jewish religion and the ritual of their religion, because we don't have the same ritual in Christianity, or it's not adhered to in the same way. But that's what it was. It was mostly white people and black people. And then probably in the 90s, we started seeing more Latinos move into Nashville. And now it's like very diverse.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, that's like the migration patterns of the country and how people been moving even since COVID. I know when my dad was around in Texas, there was you had a lot of people from the West Coast moving. He lived right outside of Austin.
oh yeah.
So he had a lot of people while he was there moving from California, from San Francisco, from Northern California, and from LA. They were moving there. A lot of people. They would have it was monthly. It was people moving in, just pouring into their region. It was outside of Austin, and then even in the greater Austin area, just pouring into the region from there. Businesses were moving there because it was cheaper to get going there. It's cheaper to start a business there.
No state income tax.
Yeah, no state income. Same thing with Florida. So I think Nevada's the same way as well.
Tennessee too.
Oh, Tennessee's that. I didn't know Tennessee was that way.
Yeah.
Oh, so that makes sense why people are moving there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's amazing that there's certain states that just don't have a state income tax, and then others do. Like it's amazing to me.
You know, the few tax problems I've had in my life, they were all through the state. The state has been, they were much rougher in any punitive way than the federal government.
You mean the state here in California?
The California franchise.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to go up against them.
Yeah, they want their money. When they want their money, they want their money.
Right.
Yeah, I always remember just, because I would just take my taxes to like H&R Block or whatever, and I would always, no matter what job I had, when I'd go do my taxes, every single year, and this is through H&R Block. I'm not doing it myself online. This is through a reputable company. Oh, you owe this much to the state. And it'd be like $300-$400. I'd be like, how do I owe money to the state? And like, well, you didn't take it. I go, no, that doesn't make any sense. Everything's taken out of my paycheck. How do I owe more money to the state? And so I'm always thinking like there has to be some deduction from the company I was working with that they weren't taking into account. That's something that I owed at the end of the year, which would only be a couple $100. But when you're living in LA and you haven't like made it,
right,
$400 just out of the blue sometimes is like, man.
Oh yeah.
It's like 2-3 days of work all of a sudden it's just taken out of your account because you have to owe it to the state. And I just think what's amazing to me is that California has so many people, so much industry. And I think because of the segregation of the state, there's a class segregation here. I wouldn't necessarily, there is a racial segregation, but there definitely is. The class segregation is very noticeable. That it feels like when you drive around certain neighborhoods and you're trying to better yourself, start a business, make more money, break into the entertainment business, that sometimes it feels like you're climbing Everest. to like do that. It's this unending climb. And no matter you make 2 steps up, gotta go a step back. 2 steps up, 4 steps back.
Well, the big surprise to me is all the people who had private business. They were, when I grew up, they were always doing so much better than any public employees.
Mm-hmm.
But in the last 20, 30 years, public employees, boy, they have it good, especially in California.
Yeah.
I mean, from teachers to firefighters, and I take my hats off to their service to the community. But boy, do they have kind of cushy safety nets and pensions and all that stuff. You got to hear this. I had a very good friend of mine go on Price is Right and win a car.
Oh, wow.
It was like a Thunderbird. And she was from Tennessee. And they would not let her leave the state until she paid like $11,000 tax.
What?
Yeah. I mean, they weren't holding her by gunpoint, but she could not take the car. She couldn't take her winnings until she paid a tax on it. And of course, that would be, it could be given partially back to her at the end of the year based on her overall, but they counted as overall earnings. And I thought, but she doesn't even live here. But she came here to do the show. She had to, and so we cost her money to win the Thunderbird.
Wow. Can you imagine the feeling of being so excited for winning a car like that? First of all, you're on like this game show that you probably loved. You go on, win a car like that, and then they're like, oh no, but you have to pay us $11,000 before you can take the car back. You're like, what are you talking about? Oh, the ups and downs of that feeling.
Oh, big brother.
Yeah, it's everywhere. It's sad. It's really sad because I think it's such a slow burn that people just feel a sense of being defeated after a while. Like, well, what am I supposed to do? What's the point? What's the next step? That it is really it's sad, I think. I know that the Miles dealt with that red tape a lot. There's a lot of like red tape just to use a space because it belonged to the city. It belongs to the city of Santa Monica. And there's a lot of red tape to use just a theater to be like, hey, I want to put on a production here. I want to do this. And there's so much bureaucratic stuff that people had to go through to do something like that. Where if you were somewhere like back in Pennsylvania, where I'm from, or probably from like, somewhere in the country in Tennessee, someone just goes, oh, just fill out this form and there you go.
Yeah.
That's it. Oh, it's like a couple $100 to rent it out, and here's the form, and you're good. You need like someone would maybe help you with lights or whatever is there or whatever it is. But here it's everything feels like you're the DMV.
Yeah.
In LA. Everything feels like the DMV.
Oh gosh.
Even the DMV, I had to go to the DMV during COVID to re-update my license or whatever. The line was wrapped around the block. I was there for 4.5 hours. That's honestly, that's disgusting that the state of California allows that. That's disgusting. And then they weren't doing appointments at that time. So everyone had to just come en masse to the DMV and stand in line. And they weren't doing appointments because of COVID, which logically makes absolutely no sense. Because if you're trying to actually stop the spread of COVID, why would you have everyone come whenever they want to come? Why wouldn't you instead say, look, we are strictly appointment, and it's a very strict appointment slot to make sure that we don't have a massive influx of people here to maintain the social distancing and also to make sure that it's all done according to the guidelines of whatever the state wants. Instead, they would just have a massive group of people going in and out. The logic makes no sense.
I wrote a play several years ago called Driver's Edge, and it was about a renegade driving instructor. Instead of teaching a driver's education class how to drive better, he teaches them how to beat the system. Shortcuts, putting a dummy in the passenger seat.
He's like the Robin Hood of driver's ed.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to do. It was very cathartic for me. It was a one-man show. But the takeaway from it was government and bureaucracy has a tendency to enlarge itself. It can't help it. It just enlarges itself. Stop signs go up in neighborhoods for no reason, and they never come down. They never come down. So everything is to stop the flow of traffic, to control. We're not creating flow. We're creating control. You must stop here. You must stop there. You must, the lights aren't synchronized on any. And the only way they're synchronized is you make it through one yellow light, and you go, oh, I made it through this one, and the next ones go red. And you go, they did that on purpose. Mm-hmm. They're synchronized like that. They're not synchronized to allow flow. They're synchronized, oh, you made it through the last one, we're going to get you for the next one.
Yeah.
And so it's constantly stopping, starting, brake linings, brake fluid, gas being spent, stopping and starting. And we never used to have that back home in Tennessee. Tennessee's adopted all that stuff.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's stop, once again, stop signs and red lights go up willy-nilly. And you go, well, why? Why are you stopping me on this, this major thoroughfare when there's no side streets or anything? Control. It's bureaucracy enlarging itself.
Yeah, and a sense of self-importance.
Yeah. Yeah, we have to do something. The local councilman has to do something for his time in office.
Yeah. The idea of everyone trying to... the helping, oh, well, I just want to do the right thing. I want to do the right thing. And people never ask, like, well, what is your version of, what basis do you understand what the right thing is? And it's hilarious to me that everyone will say, well, I've heard people say this, like, oh, well, people are born knowing what the right thing to do is. And I go, no, that's not true. That's not true. I think people believe they have good intentions. There's a huge difference between saying, oh, well, my intentions were pure versus... I know what the right thing to do is. That's a huge... it's so hard to say what the right thing to do is in those situations. In any situation, it's very difficult. It's a very open-ended philosophical idea.
That's where history has looked toward their wise, not just the college-educated intelligentsia, but the wisest among them. And the wisest statesmen, the wisest leaders. And wisdom is, I don't see a whole lot of it in our statesmen these days. I see a lot of bright people and articulate people, and they know how to convey a message and everything. But wisdom, it used to be that we had a lot of trust in the elders in our community. And I think that's a sad thing to see that they're pushed to the side. We had this young professor come along. He's got the right ideas, Yeah,
it's I always felt that way about the more intellectual, educated people, higher educated, intellectual. They have this tendency of like having great ideas and this structure within the learning process. It's beautiful. It's actually like very precise, and it shows a great amount of control and restraint, and it's like all the greatest attributes of human evolution to get together to do that and have an idea, like a society of learning. The problem is, though, they always lack a balance within their own heart center. It's always too much in the head. It's too intellectual. It's too analytical. It feels to me there's no balance in the heart, which looks and is able to counter all of the intelligence, which I think that's like a almost like a philosophical idea for someone like Christ, in the figure of Christ, was he was able to have this balance of, he understood their law, he understood the Jewish law just as well as they did, but he was able to balance it with the compassion and the forgiveness, knowing that, hey, it is the law, but people are going to break it. It just is normal in human nature to break it. And to be able to have the foresight and the perception to know when someone is really trying to uphold it and they're humble and repentant, but they still break it, and to forgive them in that. And he was a balance of water and fire, the priest king. And the United States lacks that greatly today. There's a big lack with that.
To get back to Lincoln, Lincoln freed more young men who were awaiting public execution, either by hanging or a firing squad. And the military leaders hated him for that, because they thought if you desert or if you do this or do that, mostly desertion, young country boy getting scared, running away. They'd face the firing squad or a hanging, and the mothers would come plead with Lincoln at his public opinion baths, and more times than not, his heart dictated his choice, and the militarists hated him for that. And the interesting thing is, Frank, I understand both sides, because rule of law and wanting to keep the troops in order to win the battle, you must have strong consequences. But Lincoln, he's sitting there in an office and getting teletypes from the battlefield, and they were losing so much before they started winning. It was like, all the weight of all of those young boys dying in horrible ways. It just was, it was too much. And so his humanity, let them go, free them, and he was able to pardon a whole lot of young people. So
think about how much family sorrow that his heart and forgiveness prevented because of that, and like how many families that could have possibly hated the government even more for generations. Some kind of pain, loss, because of a son of theirs being executed for desertion, and that how much of that he prevented by forgiving them and saying, like, it's, I seeing the mother's plight, the mother's sorrow and humbleness before the government and before the leader of the country. And he said, I empathize with you, and here you are. It's okay.
He did the same thing with the South. He didn't want to punish the South, and he didn't punish the South. I mean, from what I understand, none of the leaders of the Confederacy were executed. I might be wrong there, but his whole idea was not to punish the South, was to allow them back into the Union.
He understood that counterbalance of, if we're a society that's too strict and too harsh, the people become too fearful and nothing moves forward. They're just paralyzed by fear. And I think that he prevented possibly more he could have possibly prevented more civil war and more strife because of that, and saying, like, hey, we're done. This is over with, but can't do this again. And this is a fair warning. You're welcome back in, but this can't happen again. And we will forgive you for this. And we move forward and try to bond in whatever way we can through this. And unfortunately, when he was planning Reconstruction, he was killed.
Yeah.
And that's really where the South took a big hit. I know a lot of historians will say that the Civil War deeply and negatively impacted the South, but actually it was the Reconstruction period that's really what it did its damage, even with African Americans.
Yes.
And for the African American community being integrated into the greater whole of the American culture. Because you still had the South, they were able to develop Jim Crow laws, which it's like when you think of what Lincoln did in freeing the slaves and the equality of man through that action and through the war, that, okay, well, how did these other laws take shape that then ended up still placing this cult or this community below the general community of America? How did that happen? And you're like, oh, and when you really look into the details, it was because Reconstruction failed.
Oh, it did, and I would say that the North was no better. The North, I don't know if they. I mean, we just go back to when I was at busing, when busing came around the '60s. You know, everybody said, "Oh, the South is they're going to fight this. They're going to fight this." Well, no, they didn't. They allowed the integration, the forced integration of different schools. But you know who fought it the most? Boston.
Oh, really?
Boston, the home of what? Harvard, and aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the so-called intelligentsia. So the North, you know, the distrust of the other, the what you call it, prejudice, discrimination, whatever it is, it wasn't just in the South. Anyway, that's a lot of people. They love to characterize the South as they're all a bunch of racists, they're all a bunch of bigots because they talk a certain way. You know, they have that accent or whatever.
And the history
and the history, and the KKK was formed in Pulaski, Tennessee. But the KKK wasn't the only one holding black people back. You know, there was a lot of institutional racism, and you're exactly right. Reconstruction was much harder on African Americans and black people than anything prior, I think.
Yeah. And I was talking about it with another guest. We were talking about how the institutional racism that took place, like I know and I remember my own grandfather telling my dad stories of this. Like there would be African American guys that would serve in World War II. A lot of them would serve, go to the European theater, Pacific theater, risk their lives, come back, and the government or the banks wouldn't allow them to get home credit loans or home lines of credit or loans for a house to grow or to start a business. And you look at that and you're like, if there was anything that I could ever say to the people of America, and when I say the people, I mean the people, nothing with an institution, no politician, but just bring us all together and say, it's not me doing it to you, and it's not you doing it to me. It's that institution. It was always that institution. And yes, there were constituents. But if you look at historically, they're always worked up by something with this institution. This institution and these things have been corrupted for a long, long time. And they are beautiful institutions. They are the best in the world in what they are. There are checks and balances. There are decompression valves that are kind of set into place for all this stuff. But we have to, I think it's so important to come together and understand that, yes, we have our differences culturally, ethnically, racially, whatever it is. But we're all Americans first. That is the most important thing. And that is something that's intangible. You can't see it with your eyes. It's only with your heart and with your mind. And it's a perfect blend of the two. Because all of the stuff that African Americans went through, including slavery, civil rights, the music, the integration with sports, this is all of our history. It's the entire country's history. It's actually world history. It belongs to the world because the symbolism is greater than anything actually I think anyone can really comprehend. It always comes down to this them versus us or this versus that. Like this great evil of this. The word racism is always used, and it's true, but it's actually deeper than just an idea of hatred because of the color of skin. It's that we may all look different. Culturally, we're different. Historically, the way that we were brought together historically, we're different. And there's so many things that were built up through an idea, and the idea was never actually real. The idea was something, it was a ghost. The idea of the differences was always a ghost. It was always a mirage that people chased, and they believed the idea and forced the idea through action, which is what racism and institutional racism actually was. But the root of it was just a ghost. It was nothing. It was an idea. And as you see, as time goes on, like we talked about, like I know you and I have talked about it before with jazz music, with blues music. This is some of the most beautiful parts of our history. Some of the most beautiful parts, in my opinion, it's like I grew up listening to the blues, playing it, and jazz. I'm sure with you living in Nashville, you grow up with this stuff. To me, I was like, this is just American history. This is American art, is what this is. And it comes through immense suffering, immense pain, and digging deep into whatever these artists and musicians were able to do is to dig deep into whatever that was. You can feel it in the earth. You can feel the fields, and you can feel that whatever that history of slavery and being taken from another land and brought over, you can feel it in that music. You can feel it in the chugging of the guitar. Mm-hmm. And it's beautiful. Mm-hmm. And you like can't replicate it. You can't just say like, well, I'm going to make something like that and from scratch, like a new thing that's completely from that. Like this is just generations of this being brought into this form. And it's us as a whole. It's us. It's our consciousness. It's this idea of coming together through difference, through strife. And yes, through anger and hatred is there. Through love and forgiveness is there. We are the full palette of colors as America. The full palette of spiritual color and emotion. We are the Big Bang and the end of the universe all at the same time. Here in this country. And people are always like, that's why I can't stand when people are like, well, we all just need to get along. I'm like, no. You can not get along constructively. But no, I don't want to get along. I don't want similarities. Oh. Keep the differences.
Oh, yes.
I don't want us all to be the same. I don't want us to all think the same. Let the progressives push the future and let the conservatives keep them in check. That's the balance. It's the way it's supposed to be. It's the way it always is supposed to be. If you look at it like I talked about this in the other podcast, if you look at progressivism, at the core of it, did progressivism create a beautiful concept? Lincoln was a progressive. Mm-hmm. That was a progressive idea. The civil rights movement was a progressive idea. Art, creation, any kind of new idea, creative idea is a progressive idea. But conserving certain values is what also keeps sovereign autonomy over your rights. You can only maintain freedom of speech through conserving the idea of freedom of speech.
That's right.
You can't, if you go too far with it, too forward, you end up removing it because you're trying to redefine what it is, because that's the progressive idea. You redefine, you tinker, you change. That's something that we should all agree on. Don't change that. There are other things, yes, let's change. There's other things that allow the normal flow of progress, but let's agree to conserve that idea.
You know, if we're talking music, it's interesting because I agree with everything you just said. But music, I have a deep love of classical music. I was
you play the piano? Yeah.
And I was raised in a family that valued classical music, and Johann Sebastian Bach wrote all of his music to God.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a strict form to it, and I love that strict form. And it's beyond words. It's a feeling. It makes me feel good, and it makes me feel like one with the universe. But sometimes I hear a Snoop Dogg song or something like that, and I go, man, that's bumping, and I like the way that makes me feel too. And then I hear a gospel church, and it makes me want to cry. It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people, I like this kind of music, but I don't like that kind of music. I like that. I personally, I think I like every genre of music out there, and I feel it deeply.
It touches you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I always felt as a kid that like classical music, like because I love Mozart's Requiem. I just love that whole opera.
Yeah.
It's so. It reminds me of Carl Jung, the Swedish psychoanalyst.
Mm-hmm.
When Jung talks about integrating the shadow, and I feel like that's what Mozart was trying to do. He was like contemplating all of the dark stuff in his life, and it like came out on that. And I think it was his last opera that he wrote.
Yeah.
And I heard stories, I don't know if they're true, but I remember reading about him that he would see things as he was writing that. Like he knew his time was coming to an end. He knew something was chasing him. This dark figure was chasing him, this kind of thing. And I'll listen to that. And Mozart wrote the same way. If you ever read the play Amadeus, I think it's
yeah.
There's a great scene in it. I forget who wrote that.
Schaeffer.
Is it Peter Schaeffer? Was it Peter Schaeffer?
Something Schaeffer.
It's an amazing play. There's a scene.
Yeah.
There's a scene where I don't know if Mozart really said this. I like to think he did because it's so beautiful. That there's a scene in it that's like he's like stepping out of line in conservatory, and he's using techniques that like wasn't really allowed, I think, in the conservatory. And he said something like, "I'm writing for the angels to sing this to God." Like, you have no right to I'm writing this for God. I'm not writing this for you. I'm writing this to the angels. I'm writing this for the angels that are sitting aside the throne in heaven to sing to God. And when I listen to like Mozart or Bach or Beethoven, I always imagine them writing for the God of the church, the stone cathedral church. But when I listen to something like Robert Johnson or blues music, I always imagine they're writing to the God that created like the earth, the nature, the fields, the moon, the clouds. Like and there's this, they're like the same.
Yeah.
They have this, there's a sameness to them, but there's like, it's like the way that, maybe God created man, which was very precise, right? This precise in the more East or the more European form of classical music, but then like African American blues music, it was like it's like the version of God that's just painting the oceans in the sky. It's like a much more flowing, free for all version, but they're like the same.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's like it's like, whoa, that's us. It's like human beings that we've come up with this. There's a song called, I forget the title, but it's by a guy named Blind. I think his name's Blind Lemon Jefferson. I think is his name. There's no words to it, but it's something, cold was the night. Into the cold night, I think is the name of the song. And he just plays this. It's an old recording, that old, like, what's it called? Like a whatever like tin can sound was, that grainy tin can recording sound.
Mm-hmm.
And he just howls with his voice and plays the guitar.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this most like, it's like the beginning and the end. It's the alpha, the omega. It's all of that in between. And it's one guy. I think he was blind. It's one guy by himself, couldn't even see.
Wow.
but was able to paint these incredible pictures with his voice and with his playing, and the way that his playing would complement his voice. Like I said, I don't actually think the song has any actual words in it. It's just him just it's just that.
Wow.
In this guitar playing, and I listened to that, and it's like I would drive around LA sometimes at night, or come when I lived in Hollywood. I would drive from the west side from work over here back home, and I would just play it on the freeway, and it's the wind, it's night, and the just no traffic, and just blasting that, and you're like, wow, this is like the beginning of just whenever all this was made. And it's like like I said, the classical music is like the refinement. There's some more. Let's put a little like mathematical refinement.
Exactly.
Where the other one was a free for all. It's spirit. The other one's math. Spirit and math. Flow and math. The flow of water and then the preciseness of the mountains. Like there's this. And so when people say there's like differences, yeah, there are differences, but like the soul of us is one and the same. We are the same. We were never meant to live with these great towering institutions watching your every move, because what it does is it gets in the way of your own spiritual autonomy, which guides your creativity and guides your destiny here. So you're not meant to live with that. That will always fall at the end of the day. And the people that run these things don't know this. That's what Babel is. That's what the story of Babel is. It is the centralization of government, and guess what? It fell, and everyone ends up speaking. It's an archetype of the human collectiveness, that whenever we try to we all need to be the same, and everyone needs to not. I always avoid people who talk that way. Everyone's like, oh, everyone needs to get along. Or when you hear someone say, we all just need to love each other. We all just need to love each other. I go, I agree with you. But love is many forms. And we interpret a lot of modern love with, I love you, I'm going to let you do whatever you want. That's not necessarily love. Because if you know in your gut, in your heart, that something is not right, and it comes from, I need to tell you this because this is what I feel and I love and care about you, so I need you to know this. Some people interpret that as, oh, you're not letting me live the way I want to live. And it's like, well, no, I'm not stopping you. I have to tell you this. There's something telling me that I have to tell you this. You can do whatever you want with it. But that's also love as well.
I feel the same way when I hear people say, give peace a chance, or peace on earth, or this. It's a beautiful concept, but there's never been peace on earth, macro or micro, and the only time I could ever envision there being peace on earth is after some kind of nuclear holocaust.
Mm.
And so when I hear people say that, it seems Pollyannish, and they're not. It's first stage thinking. They're not thinking, well, historically there's never been peace on earth, so how could we achieve that? Total annihilation. Mm-hmm. There'd be a period of peace on earth, and that would probably last only a week.
Yeah, until someone would come out of the rubble and say, well, I'm in charge.
I want your water, And so, I don't know. It's probably a little too in my head to think that way, but I do.
I don't think it is. I agree with you. I think that the peacemakers, the ones that are always preaching the most about peace, I think a lot of times what's behind their intention is there's peace if I'm in charge.
Yeah.
There's like, give peace a chance, and it's almost like they don't finish the thought. It's like, give peace a chance when I'm in charge, or give peace a chance to put me in charge. There's like an incompleteness to their thought, and it's a common thing within our culture now. Especially today, like in the last week, it's definitely a thing that's happening. But I would say one of the most beautiful things about war is we get to witness extreme acts of courage and bravery. We get to be reminded that the great enemy is not the man across the border that you're launching missiles at, because that's not the enemy. The guy that's launching the missiles from the plane and hitting civilians is not the enemy. The civilians taking the brunt of the missile is not the enemy. It's what lies beyond the impact is the enemy. And it's the people who are willing to stare death in the face and say, I know that this is coming, but I got to do what I got to do for my family, even if I put my life on the line to be an example. So you look death in the face and you say, I guess if today is the day, then it's the day. Let's go. I'm not backing down. And we've seen extreme examples of that with Ukraine. And I think that this is where artists and poets and musicians, this is their time to really tell those stories. That's why they're always there. The poets and the artists, when Achilles killed Hector, it's because someone wrote about it.
Right.
It's because that someone, when Achilles was hit in the heel by Paris's arrow, it's because somebody wrote about it. That someone told this story. With Alexander the Great piecing the world together, the known world at the time, with Christ walking Judea and saying, "Hey, you're blind. Come here. Let me help you." Don't criticize them because it's like, oh, well, they can't. They're breaking the law because they're doing this during the holy day, and it's like, but they're doing it for God. So who are you to judge that when they're doing something good for other people? And it's like someone wrote about this. He didn't write about it himself. I mean, if he did, it's out there. Like, that would be incredible. He didn't, to our knowledge. Someone else wrote about it. So now we're having someone like Zelensky, like the mayor of Kiev, who's Vladimir Klitschko, who was a former heavyweight boxer, is the mayor of Kiev, and he went online with his brother and said they were going to be escorted out of Kiev, and he said, no.
Wow.
Yeah, my brother and I, we signed up. We're going to be with the armed forces right now.
Wow.
Did you hear the story about the Ukrainians that were on that island? The
No.
13 soldiers, and there was a Russian naval ship that was talking to them and said, lay down your arms. There's some island. I'm not really sure where. I know there was like 13 Ukrainian soldiers that were holding onto this tiny little island, and these Russian soldiers on this ship were sending them a message saying, lay down your arms, surrender, or we're going to be forced to fire upon you. And they were like, who is this base? We're the Russian Federation, we're the Russian naval forces. And then basically just said, fuck you. And they fought and died.
Really?
Yeah. They were bombed.
Oh.
They fought and died. And it's like the fact that people can stare death in the face and do this. And I think as Americans, we're so hypnotized by our own reflection that to see examples of this kind of bravery and this courage, you see women picking up guns, older ladies picking up guns, the images of this, that if there is any good that comes out of it, it's like, oh, the human spirit hasn't been extinguished yet.
Yeah. Well, we see it in countries that have more challenges than we have here in America. As I get back to, we've been soft here, and but Russia has had many more challenges, and all those countries that have faced poverty and strife and all those things. You see the human spirit rise, and that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And the ugliness of war.
Yeah, it's very, there's something so poetic and eternal about it. Like someone like Zelensky, and you see, there were reports that he fled Ukraine, and he went online and kept posting because there's all this cyber warfare and all the misinformation, and he went online on his Instagram and was posting videos and said, I have not left. Mm-hmm. I'm here. He was like in the town, in the middle of Kiev. Like, I'm here. We haven't left. We are rallying this, and he's wearing like an army fatigue. I mean, this is the president of the country.
Wow.
And you see this guy stand up to whatever this, I mean, it's death. It's not Putin. It's death. staring him in the face. And you get to see what like real masculinity in because there's not a lot of times in the world where you get to see it. There's not many examples that you get to see the old iron stomach of masculinity in 2022.
Well, our military leaders used to lead the charge.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to go, oh my gosh, they're the first on the horse, and they don't do that anymore. They're behind in a tent or in a helicopter or something, directing things from a computer or something. It's a different kind of militarist.
Yeah, it is. It's very different. I had a buddy tell me he read the biography of John Adams, and John Adams described George Washington that way. He goes, Washington had to be pulled off of his horse.
Yes.
His men, because he would charge right in almost without them. And they'd be like, sir, they'd like yank him up. Because like, if he gets killed, this is it.
Yeah.
It was during the American Revolution. If he dies, we're done. He would charge right into the battle on top of his horse, so everyone can see him and see exactly who he is, and they'd have to pull them down off his horse and tell him, sir, you need to get back. And he's like, no, I'm going in. And he would fight these battles against the British. Alexander the Great, he was right in the middle of it with his men. He was the first one in. And so you look at guys like this, and I know everyone has their perspective on history and what was right and what was wrong, but there's nothing, you can't deny the fact that there's a certain immortal quality to the people that are willing to look death in the face and say, if today is the day, then so be it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think Hamlet, what's the line that Hamlet says? I forget the exact words, but it's like, if it is to be, then it will be. There's a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. Something like that in that line, that it's like, if this is it, then this is it. I'm ready. The readiness is all.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. But but we can wrap it up on that. But I want to thank you for coming on and doing all this. I appreciate it. Thank you for sharing your insights into Lincoln and your experience and your vulnerability and your passion, and I really appreciate it. I want to see you. I want to see you in this movie with Clint Eastwood now. I want to see you do it.
Thanks, Frank. I appreciate it too.
Absolutely, you're welcome. I appreciate you just willing to share your perspective on what you see and what you believe to be true, and your willingness to share it with the public and share it in this format. And I think that there is, I also consider that in our day and age to be an act of bravery and courageousness. It might not be the same as charging into a war, but you're willing to exercise what you believe is free, what is freedom of speech, and you're willing to lay it out there for everyone to hear. So I appreciate it. And on that, everyone, that will be the end of this episode. This is our guest, Mark Aaron, and this is the Last Minute Audition podcast. This episode will be out sometime next week at the end of the week. I'll probably make it a little announcement for a solo segment on the show between now and then. But thank you, everyone, and we'll talk to you all later.